You know that I'm here to judge your nature images for you tonight, with that said, thanks again for inviting me to judge for you, and we'll get straight into the images. And our first image for the evening is P. arctocephalus fosteri, an image of this New Zealand native or endemic seal, I would say that this is a beautifully taken image, lovely exposure. The detail is very nice. Just perhaps a little bit on the pictorial side from a nature competition perspective, making it a lot harder than we would like to be able to identify the species. A very nice detailed image though. And next up we have Patroika australis, South Island robin, and this image of the robin is interesting because it's got some behavior here with a wing out and the bird presumably singing with its beak open. Just technically there are issues with the image. There are burnt out spots and there are deep dark patches, so we're just really struggling here with a little bit too much contrast. I don't know whether you had the wherewithal within your original image file to be able to open up the shadows and pull back the highlights and give us back some of the missing detail. It will depend on what your original exposure was, of course, but in the context of this competition, I'm also going to have to let this one go. Next up is Kia waiting, and this is a perfectly fine image of the Kia, a good profile study in its natural environment. Nothing particularly exciting about it. We don't learn anything about its behavior or its food or anything, but it's a perfectly well exposed and acceptable image of a Kia, and this one I am accepting. Our next image is called Rangi Reflects on Moana, and this is a very nice pictorial image of sky reflected on water. Unfortunately, in the context of nature, we need to be demonstrating something about nature in the way of a species identification or a behavior or something of that sort. And here we have a purely pictorial image with a pictorial title, Rangi Reflects on Moana. And in the context of the instructions for this competition, this is not going to meet the criteria for a nature image, and so I am rejecting this image. Milford Kia is our next image, and this is another perfectly fine nature shot of a Kia perching on a beach branch in Fiordland somewhere, I expect. It's a very nice acceptable image of a Kia, and that's how I'll score it, with an acceptance. Next up is an image called Seal. I suggest for a nature competition you could do better than this. It's certainly identifiable as a New Zealand fur seal, and anybody that you ask in the club would be able to, with experience in nature, would be able to help you identify that. So it is better to give more rather than less. Seal suffices, and so I'm not going to reject it on that basis, but the primary issue for me is that the rock surface is burnt out, and technically it's deficient in that respect. And so this is a close image, nearly accepted, but unfortunately I'm also letting this one go. Our next image is green bottle flies, and this is a very nice clear image of these flies. It's pleasing color-wise as well. The exposure is fine, and it's not going to get a high award, but it's certainly an acceptable image, and I'm accepting it. The next image is called Skink. And it certainly is a skink. I'm not sure which one this is. It could be Moko, but it doesn't look like rainbow skink, fortunately. And it's a very nice, clear and precise image of the beast, certainly identifiable from what we have here. What I do have an issue with, though, is that you're not showing the full beast. You've given us 3/4 of it, but you haven't given the whole tail. And I think that in terms of identifying this animal, seeing the whole thing would be much better, and consequently I'm not accepting this. Next up we have common daisy Bellis perennis, and while I don't doubt you probably have your naming accurately done here, part of what we're trying to do with nature is understand the environment, and what you've provided us with here is a very nice pictorial image of the daisy in a very soft background, which is very soft and pleasing from a pictorial perspective, but doesn't really suit the nature context of being able to see the environment in which it's living. And so for those reasons, I'm not accepting this image. This next image is called eucalyptus bark. And this is a very fine textured study of the bark of this eucalypt. It would be an improvement if you could tell us which eucalypt it was from, but it's acceptable that you've told us it's eucalyptus bark. It's a lovely image, pictorially speaking, but it also is quite acceptable, I think, from a nature perspective, and so I'm accepting this image. This next image is P. hematopus unicolor, and in Maori this is Torea Pango, or at least in the north it is. I'm not sure whether that's the same in the south, but this is the variable oyster catcher is its common name, and this is a fine study of the variable oyster catcher, or P. hematopus unicolor, and I have no complaints with this. It's a very static study, but it certainly does the job of helping us identify this species perfectly well, and I'm accepting it. This image is just called seal. And once again, it would be useful to identify this seal if you can. I think it's a New Zealand fur seal, but I'm not totally sure. But that's what it looks like to me. It's not a great identifying image, but the behavior that we're seeing here, tossing around a fish that it's captured and in the process of devouring, is quite interesting and different, not something we see all the time, and so I'm awarding this one a high acceptance. This next image is Ardea modesta preening, and this is a very nicely exposed image of the kotuku, probably on a nest at Okarito, since that's primarily where they nest. And all of the fine white feather detail is there. It's perfectly sharp and crisp, and it's also in nesting mode. And so I think this is also a very fine image, and I'm giving this one a high acceptance. The next one is pied shag, and this is also a perfectly fine study of the pied shag, just a little bit short in texture in the brightest white areas and the darkest black areas, and I think it could have just done with pulling back on the highlights and opening up the shadows just to give it a little bit more detail. Having said that, I think it's otherwise a perfectly fine image and not too far away from an acceptance here. So this one is not accepted, but it's a close image. Next we have banded dotterel, Charadrius bisinctus, and this is also a good study of this bird, somewhat diminished by the quality of the sensor or the degree to which you've cropped in, or both. I'm not sure which, but it just has a fuzzy, soft feel amongst the sharpness that degrades the quality of the image, unfortunately. So had it been just that little bit sharper with a bit more detail, it would have made the mark, but unfortunately I'm not able to accept this one. This next image is Anatoropsis littoralis, seashore wolf spider, and this is a very nice capture. It's very tonally uniform. You can see quite clearly how the spider camouflages against the sand brilliantly, and we've got lovely detail around the mouth parts and the eyes and the abdomen, and all in all it's a very fine image. I'd have been happy to take myself, and I'm happy to award this one an honours. Next we have Gallirallus australis, Weka, and this is a fine image of the Weka, which the photographer has taken quite adequately. The exposure's fine. I just feel that the colours have been pushed just a little bit, and it's a little bit too vibrant, and I think that's really its main failing from my perspective. Otherwise it's a perfectly good image, and I think if you just pulled the vibrancy back a little and toned down the yellow spots in the background that are so bright and really catch the eye so strongly, you would have a much more acceptable image. As it stands, I'm letting this one go. Next is variable oystercatcher pair sharing incubation duties at Catlins. And first off, I have to praise you for a very fine nature title. I think it tells us exactly what we're seeing, and both as to the species and the behavior, and also tells us where, which sometimes can be quite important. Particularly, for example, if we didn't know there were any variable oyster catchers in the Catlins, knowing that that's where you took it would help us to appreciate perhaps its rarity. I'm not saying it is rare, but I hope you understand what I'm driving at. The image is sharp enough, but could be a bit sharper on the bird at the scrape. That's what they call their nests, because they scrape a hole in the sand. The other issue for me is that the bird with its back to us is a bit more back on, and the shadow details are quite lacking, particularly on the black of the bird at the back. So I think there are improvements you could have made to this image, and as it stands, I'm not accepting this. Next up we have rare Chirococephalus bulleri laying egg in earthquake ruin. And I've heard about this colony in the centre of Christchurch in an old ruined building. So that's really interesting. The problem that I'm having with the image is that the exposure is just a bit dull. And I can see that you have taken the exposure down of the whole image and then brightened up quite significantly the patch where the legs and the egg are underneath the bird, but the toning doesn't match the bird itself, and I think that toning down the background would have been fine, and the bird at the back, all of that's fine, but I think you really wanted the bird to be a little bit more forward in this image than your toning has allowed it to be. So that's my primary criticism. Otherwise, it's a perfectly nice nature image with a very sensible nature title as well. So I'm letting this one go, but it may do better if you make some modifications along the lines that I've suggested. Next up we have New Zealand katydid, Cadesia simplex, and I think your composition here is excellent. I'm strongly liking the fact that you've kept both antenna and all of the body and legs in the frame, so all of that's working nicely. Exposure wise, I think it's probably about right as well. My main problem with the image is that it's just a little bit too vibrant in the greens, and I think that perhaps whatever you've done, increasing the contrast or pushing the saturation or the vibrancy or some combination thereof, has just pushed the colour a little bit too richly for this nature image. And so on that basis, I'm letting this go. Next up, we have an image called Mollymawks, and that's certainly what they are. Their species now is Thalassarch. And they are certainly showing us some interesting behaviour, so well done for capturing that. I'm just a little bit disappointed that the whites on these birds are particularly on the breast of the far bird and the back of the head of the middle bird, even the top of the near bird, are just lacking in detail entirely, and that's just unfortunate. You might be able to pull it back from your raw or source image, and I suggest you see if you can, but at the moment in this competition I'm going to have to let it go on that basis, I'm afraid. Hector's dolphin at Kaikoura is our next image, and this is a very identifiable image, so it suits the subject tonight. There are a number of issues with this image. It certainly shows us the Hector's dolphin, and we can identify it from this image quite adequately, I think. I'm not quite so keen on the large stretch of water at the top that has nothing in it. That's really unnecessary. And I think you've either shot this with a very small sensor camera, or you've cropped in quite closely because we are getting strong grain and there's not a lot of detail in the dolphin, unfortunately. And that's just the nature of cropping in and not really having enough pixel real estate to do the subject justice. So unfortunately, lovely though the opportunity was, and well captured as it is, I'm going to have to let this go. Next we have pied shag after early morning swim, and perhaps some of you are feeling a bit dejected about the number of passes I've given to images so far, but in the same grade here we see a very nice image of a a difficult subject, being black and white with not much in between. And maybe the lighting was partly what was favoring you here, but what I'm seeing is beautiful texture and detail throughout the white feathers and throughout the black as well, and lovely, sharp, crisp detail at that. And I'm very happy to award this an honours. Next we have an image called Seagull, and I must say I'm quite disappointed in your title, in the sense that most people, I think, would know a red-billed gull. If they don't know other gulls, it's a very well, while it's nationally threatened now because of reduction in numbers, it's actually a very common gull and one we all encounter. It seems to me it was at a colony, because you've got two chicks here, but you made no mention of them in your title, and I think that's unfortunate. There is interesting behaviour going on here, but the chicks are quite subdued in the background and not very noticeable, whereas the primary birds in the image, the adult birds, are largely overexposed in the bright areas, and also soft focused as well. I don't mind the background bird and the bird flying in being out of focus, but the head of the adult bird with its beak open is bordering on the out of focus around the head area. So these seem like picky things, and I'm sorry, but that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to a nature photography competition, and I'm going to have to let this one go. This image is Magpie Juvenile, Gymnorrhina Tibicen, or Tibiken, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, it's C-E-N on the end. And this is a nicely taken image of this species, and I think it's perfectly sharp, and we've got nice detail on the bird. Compositionally, I think it's just a little bit too low in the frame. I don't think we needed all of the out of focus area above the bird, and we've just got so close to the margin at the bottom that the toes are almost dropping out, and I just think compositionally it's a little bit weak, although in terms of being a nature subject it's perfectly fine. So I have to be quite tough, because I've got limits on my numbers for processing today, and I'm not able to let this one go through. And our final image in C grade is White-Faced Heron Finding Breakfast, and this is also a beautifully exposed image, lovely and sharp, with some action going on. We've got the drips coming off the fingerling that it's about to consume, and we can see the fish that it's captured quite clearly. And all in all, it's a very nice rendering of this species. I see a lot of white-faced herons in nature. In nature photography, I mean, and this is amongst the nicer ones that I've seen, and I'm very happy to award it an honours. So now we move on to the B grade, and our first image here is called Pied Shag at Totaranui. And this is a very nice image, both in a nature context and pictorially. I love all the feather detail. The bird is very identifiable, and pictorially it's a solid image as well. And I'm happy to award this a high acceptance. Our next image is called Stork, and this is a perfectly acceptable nature image, even though it's in a human environment, because that's what storks naturally do of their own volition. And so this is a good representation of how storks nest on chimneys in Europe, and I think it's a perfectly acceptable nature image, not overly strong because the stork itself is tending towards burning out, but not too badly, and I'm happy to accept this image. This image is called Cygnets, and this too is a perfectly fine image of these young chicks, and I like its feather detail. It's a little bit soft on the front leading chick around the beak, but I'm not too worried about that. I would have preferred a little bit more room around the chicks. They feel a bit tightly constrained within the frame, but that's my only slightly down comment. I think it's a perfectly acceptable image, and that's what I'm going to do. This one's accepted. Crested grebe is the next image, and this is a nice capture of this bird. I like all the reflections on the water. I think that's great. I think that it's just a little bit on the contrasty side. I would have preferred to have seen more detail in the darks and a little less brightness on the white feathers of the chick, which are starting to burn out, and I've not accepted this image. African iris is this next image, and this is a nice image of this flower. I think that we're dealing with a very pictorial presentation here, with the blackness in the background, where specifically not being shown its environment, whereas the environment is very important in nature. The detail in the flower is great, but I think that this one just falls a bit short of the standards for a nature image, and I'm not accepting this one. New Zealand native bee is this image, and the bee itself is somewhat sharp, but it's sharp in a noisy kind of way. I suspect this is a crop in on a much larger frame. We are suffering a great deal of noise, and we have no detail in the petals of the flowers, of the flower, sorry, and the detail in the bee itself in fine areas is quite diminished by the graininess, and you just didn't have the pixels to do it. So I'm letting this one go too. Wind-blown sand at beach is this image, and it's an image that gives that feel of sand being blown on a beach. So in that respect, it achieves its purpose. Compositionally, it's while it does have a perspective to it, there's not a lot in the foreground of great interest, and foreground interest is definitely something that helps make an image, particularly a landscape, quite strong. So I think that just compositionally this is weak, although it satisfies the requirements of a nature image, and I'm not accepting this one. Copper butterfly, Lepidoptera licanidae. This is a fairly common butterfly in New Zealand, and it is a native. Excuse me. I think the capture is fine, but we're falling off in sharpness at the back of the wings, and the yellows are overblown to the point of burning out in the flowers, and they are soft as well. So while I don't mind that, in the out of focus flower head at the back, I would like to have seen more detail in the flower head that the beast is on, and that's just not there because it's blown out. So not accepting this one either. Stinkhorn Fungi 2. I don't know if you have two in this competition, and they're both stinkhorn fungi, but ordinarily the two would be quite redundant. I guess that's just part of your cataloguing. The image itself is of an interesting subject, and you don't often see these, so you were lucky to have this opportunity. You had some quite strong sidelight to deal with here, and we have a lot of specular highlights on the fungi itself, and a lack of shadow detail in the darker areas. And I would rather have seen at least the whole of the main fungi that you're showing us in the frame, but that's been cropped off at the bottom. And those little minor points make the difference between an acceptance and not. And in this case, I'm afraid it's also a not. The next one is NH Driftwood, and I presume the NH is for natural history, so really just the title is Driftwood. And this is a perfectly pictorial image and representation of an interesting piece of driftwood. I would say for natural history, I would like to have seen something more in the nature of a good title telling us what it is that you're wanting us to observe about this particular piece of driftwood, or its environment, or what have you, or how it was formed, or anything that would tell a science story. But the title itself and the pictorial presentation just doesn't quite cut the mustard, I'm afraid, for a natural history competition, and I'm letting this one go too. NH Ferns. So we have NH again. I guess Ferns is the title. And here you've not attempted to tell us anything about what this species of fern is, or what it is about ferns that you're trying to show us. And pictorially, it's on the weak side too, because it's really just a pattern shot, and the lighting is fairly flat. So we don't have a lot of good texture here, and so I'm also letting this one go. Crested Grebe with Egg is this image, and this is a good shot. I like the capture of the bird. I like that you can see its dimensions and its really strong looking thighs. The issue for me with the image is that it's quite flat, not a lot of texture in it, and this is a very close run thing for me. I was close to accepting this, but in the end I just had to let it go, but a very close shot for acceptance. And that's the end of the B grade section. And our first image up is Chatham Island Forget-Me-Not, Myosotidium hortensia. And this is a nice presentation of this species and its flower. I think that it's a little bit on the oversaturated side, though. The greens are a little bit too green, the blues are a little bit too vibrant as well, and I think it would be more subtle than that in nature. So this one is Ardea modesta, Linwood Canal. Sorry, I forgot. Kotuku White Heron, Ardea modesta, Linwood Canal. And this is a nice capture of this bird in lovely light. I love all the reflected colours in the water. I love the texturing in the feathers. Perhaps just a little bit too contrasty, maybe. I mean, I don't mind it. In fact, I like it as it is, but you could perhaps just try easing off the contrast just a little. But I like it as it is, and I'm giving this a high acceptance. Bald eagle at lake edge is the next image, and this is a great capture. I love the light, love the texture and the feathers. The color is exactly spot on. I think this is a very nicely made image, and I'm giving this one an honours. Lactarius umarensis is our next fungi image, and I think this is quite beautiful, very nicely presented. I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more light under the caps into those gills, but really it's a very soft and beautifully presented image. And this one's getting a high acceptance from me. Next we have New Zealand fur seal Arctocephalus fosteri, and this is an interesting image because I think we have sufficient ingredients here to be able to identify the species. We also have a very nice exposure, and we're seeing some interesting behavior that we might not normally see. It's not a world-beating image, but it is certainly of acceptance quality from my point of view, and this one is accepted. Our next image is Erinaceus europaeus, European or common hedgehog, and I think this represents the species quite adequately. I'm not sure why you chose monochrome, but I don't think it deters us from identifying the species. So I think this is got the ingredients that we need, and I'm happy to accept this one. Nature's Patterns Namibia is our next image, and yes, this is a natural subject, and therefore it meets the criteria in that context. I'm not sure that the very graphic presentation that you've given us with strong vignetting in the bottom left corner and the baldness of the sky really makes this have a strong nature feel. It's much more in the style of a pictorial graphic image. And in a nature competition with so much else that's great to choose from, I am letting this one go. Instar nymphs of the green vegetable bug Nizara viridula is the next image, and I don't know about the instars of the green vegetable bug. I know that insects have instars where they drop their casing and move into another stage, and that process is called going through an instar, from one instar to the next. I know that Wetapunga, for example, have 17 instars. Wetapunga is the giant weta. I don't know about the instars for these bugs, but the image is well presented. The color is great. We're just a little bit of a strong specular highlight on the bug on the right, but not enough to worry me because there's so much there to help us in every other respect. And a couple of things that I've just thought about here. The red in the top right corner, that could have been toned down just a little bit more, and there is a sensor spot in the dark green in the top left that didn't bother me when I scored this, but it would be something that's easy to clean up. I've given this one a high acceptance primarily because it's interesting to see two nymphs of the same species in different stages together, and I'm assuming from the title that's what you're showing me. So well done, and this is a high acceptance. Sea anemone is this next image, And this is very cleanly photographed. It's nice and sharp throughout. There's no nasty bright spots. There's no issues with deep shadows either. I think it's a very nice representation of this species, and I'm giving this a high acceptance. This image has the same title as the previous one, Kotuku White Heron, Ardea modesta, Linwood Canal. This one has a number after it, presumably to separate it from the first one. Anyway, this one I feel is not quite as strong as the other one. It does have lovely detail. Just feel that we're getting a little bit grungy looking on the neck just below the head. The whites are turning grey, and I suspect that's because you've pulled it back just a little bit too far in that area. Apart from that, the image is fine, and I'm giving this one an acceptance. Seagull Flight is the title of this image, and I think it's a fine capture of the bird in flight. It's just coming into land, so there was not a great deal of technical difficulty here because it would be near stationary at the point of photographing. The issue for me is that it's a very dull day, so we're not getting a lot of texture, and we've lost all the detail and the shadow on the underside of the wing, and we're not really seeing the reds of the bill and feet very strongly in this red-billed gull. So this is an image called German wasp, Vespula germanica, and while I don't particularly like the beast, I think the photograph itself is excellent. It's very highly detailed, fine, crisp detail throughout. It's just a little bit on the highlighty side. There's a few specular highlights that could have been toned down, and particularly the white bit to the rear of the wasp. I'm forgiving it, placing too much emphasis on that simply because the quality of the image from a nature perspective, the quality of the bug itself is strong, and I'm giving this one a high acceptance. Starfish is our next image, and this has been nicely captured. Just a little bit more detail in the shadows would have been an improvement here, and this is very close to acceptance, but in this competition I'm just having to let this go. Lepus europaeus hare is our next image, and this is a very fine capture too. I like that you've captured it in motion. I just think that it's a little bit on the over-processed side, and for that reason I'm letting this one go. Platalia regia, royal spoonbill, is this image. And I think you've done a fine job of capturing the feather detail here, but you've somewhat sacrificed the shadow details. We do have some shadow details, but I think it would be nice just to lift the tone of the water and the details in the blacks just a little bit more. It's still a good image of the species, and really helps with identification, I feel, and I've accepted this one. Bee on lavender flower is the next image, and this is a nice representation of this species. Just a little bit soft in places, and it's got more of a soft, gentle feel to it than a detail feel, and just slightly on the pictorial side for my money. And we have much better examples of good nature images of this subject matter. So I'm letting this one go. The title of this has NHPI on the front, and I'm assuming that's not really part of the title. And then it's called Golden Pheasant Chrysolophus pictus, and the bird itself looks fine. You've done a nice job of capturing the species here, but the intrusion of out of focus objects in the front that are discoloring and murking up the detail of the beast itself, plus the high bright lights of the greenery in the top left corner just count against this in our competition tonight, and I'm letting this one go. Next up we have Australasian gannets, Morris Cerrator, demonstrating territorial behaviour, and this is a great behavioural shot. I think it's a fine image. The lighting could have been better, but the quality of detail that we're getting in the feathers and in the heads and the eyes and what have you, the beaks, is solid throughout, and I think this is an excellent behavioural image. And I'm happy to give this an honours. Gannet pair and juvenile is the next image, and this also is an excellent study of the parents and chick of this species, and the detail is great throughout. I think it's been wonderfully captured. I like that there's detail throughout the rock as well, despite the fact there's a lot of whites in this image. They're all nicely exposed. I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more shadow detail. I think the background is just a little bit too dark and detracts a little from the naturalness of the image, but that's a relatively minor thing, and I'm happy to give this a high acceptance. This one is called stinkhorn fungi, and I think this is an interesting specimen that you've captured. I like that we're seeing flies on it. I think that it's just lacking a little, though, with the bright highlights in the background in the top left, and also in the bits of wood around the base. Those are providing brighter areas than on the fungus itself, and I would like to have seen the connection of this to the ground in order to make this an image that shows us its environment as well. And I've not accepted this one. Next we have old male chimpanzee, and I think this has been well captured. The beast is nicely exposed, and I don't have any issue with the exposure. The vignetting is just perhaps a little bit on the obvious side, and I think maybe we could have done with a little less of that. But by and large, this is a perfectly acceptable nature image, and I'm accepting it. Fiordland crested penguins is our next image, and this is a nicely captured shot of these two birds. I think they're close enough together that we're not getting any ping pong effect, which is good, and it's definitely a good natural history subject. Where I think the image is failing a bit is that it's quite soft in the blacks, or deficient in the blacks, I guess is what we're talking about. And I don't know whether that's because you got some light leakage in the front of your lens, which caused it to go softly grey, or whether there was actually mist or something on the beach at the time. Perhaps a little bit of dehaze in Lightroom might have helped bring these out a little bit better, but as it stands, I'm not accepting this image. This image is titled Athene Noctua with Prey. We do have a problem here with the title. It's Noctua, not Noctura, and it's a a nice image of this little owl with its capture. Just some issues with it from a technical point of view. The whites are burning out, particularly in the base and also around the eyes and on the breast of the mouse or rat that it has. I'm also a little bit disconcerted by the red eye in the rat, and I'm wondering whether that was just the angle of the sun or whether you actually had a flash on this. I suspect it was probably not the latter because we don't have front lighting on the breast of the bird, but yeah, anyway, just disconcerting. Those little things just pull it down for me, and unfortunately I'm not able to accept this one. This image is South Island Takahe Porphyrio hochsteteri, and I'm liking the image by and large. It's a great capture of this Takahe. Some issues for me with it though. I really like that it's got its claw up as well. I think it's a little bit more than just a standing bird, but the image seems to be quite yellow to me, and I'm particularly concerned about the colour of the beak and the legs because they are not quite right for this bird, and I'm not sure what's happened there, whether you've not changed your profile to sRGB or something of that sort, and we've ended up with a colour on the legs that's out of gamut and it's not being displayed properly. Perhaps that's the problem. Anyway, it's just meant that I can't really accept the image under those circumstances. This one is albatross fighting, and I think it's a good capture of these two birds, and I like the behaviour that you've captured here. I think it's a good strong subject. There are limitations here, though. Unfortunately, we've got the wing dropped out on the right-hand edge, and the whites and blacks are falling out into no detail. So we've got overexposure in the white areas and underexposure in the blacks. So we just needed to pull those into line. I don't know whether you had the detail in your raw file for that. But that's my issue with this, and I've not accepted it. This image is Tui in the rain, and it's on a yellow-green species of harakeke, the flax. And I like that you've captured it in the rain. We can see the raindrops, and I think the composition is fine. We don't have any overexposure or underexposure here, but we do have a problem with softness. I don't know whether that was rain caused or whether the bird moved or something, but there's, particularly around the head and neck, there's kind of a soft glow effect going on, and we've lost detail. And the poi at the throat is totally absent of detail. And so I have not accepted this one. This is an image called Kia, big surprise, and the image itself is quite adequate in terms of representing the head and shoulders of this species. I'm a little bit disconcerted by the bald sky behind that makes it seem like a cutout. And that's just a little bit unfortunate. The detail is fine, but I think that we could have produced a better nature image with these circumstances, and I'm letting this one go. This one is Paxillus cuprinus. It's an imported fungi associated with birch trees, apparently. So a nice capture. I like that you've made it the centerpiece at the foreground and shown us the environment in the background. All of that works nicely. Just a lot of specular highlights on the cap of this mushroom, and we're lacking detail in the gills, and that for me is just making it an easier decision to say no, and that's where I'm at. It's a rejected, it's a not accepted image. Next is Splatter Rock, Chatham Island, submarine lava tube, and that's a very interesting image from my perspective. I've never seen anything like this before, and I really appreciate that you've taken the time and trouble to show it to me. Very interesting structure here. The lighting is not wonderful. It's not a great image technically, but it's a very interesting subject matter and something that we haven't seen before. So for the endeavour of getting out there and showing us something new, thank you, and this one is accepted. Kotuku and eel is our next image, and this is an excellent subject matter, and well captured, except for just missing getting the wing in on the left hand edge, and I really struggled to decide what to do with this, whether to accept it or not. In the end, I've opted for not accepting, but it was a very close thing. This one is Hemiphage novazelandiae feeding on Kowhai, and I see a lot of kereru feeding on Kowhai, on tiri matangi, and this is quite a common sight. They love the fresh young shoots and the new green leaves, and they'll sit and munch on them endlessly. And of course they also munch on the flowers during the flowering season too. So a very popular food source for kereru. The problem with this image is that it is overexposed. On the head we are seeing just some colour, but it's quite diminished, and down in the bottom on the right hand side, or actually throughout the Kowhai, the bright highlights in there are overexposed. So that's just a problem, and there's no getting around it, I'm afraid, and I haven't accepted this. This image is called Albatross, and I know that for a long time these birds were considered albatrosses, but DNA testing has shown that they are a subspecies of albatross that split off 50,000 years ago, and they are now thalassarch, which is not the same as albatross, and commonly called mollymawks. So better to get with the program, I think, and start calling them mollymawks. This is a lovely image, lovely detail in the whites and the blacks, so nicely captured. I like that the wing tip is dodging below a wave at the bottom a little bit. I've seen them even dip their wings in the water and not be worried about that. So it's interesting, and I think it's a quite suitable nature image, and I'm awarding this an acceptance. This one is New Zealand dotterel Geradrius obscurus protecting chick, and I think the behaviour we're seeing here is great. We can see the two legs of the chick sticking out the side of the bird as it shelters the bird under its wing. And I think all of that is good. We've got reasonable detail as well, but I find it's just a little bit problematic that the bird doesn't separate from the background very well. So this is a good image, but just not quite getting to the standard for acceptance, I'm afraid. This one is Jumping Spider, Hylas, that's its species. And I think this is a spectacular image. I know that the front legs are just dropping out of the frame in the foreground, and yet the fact that we've got a depth of field that is totally within the frame, and the sharp bits of the beast are critically sharp, and we've got amazing detail in the eyes and in that plane that the head is on. Just somehow doesn't cause me to be worried about the dropping out at the front. And I think it's an amazing image, and I'm very happy to have seen it, and I'm awarding this an honours. This image is South Island robin, Patroika australis. A very nice image of the bird in situ. Hard to be too critical of it, really, but just in the company that we have in this competition today, not quite strong enough. I think this is probably a juvenile bird, and we're not seeing a great deal of what we might need to identify this bird with. So definitely close to an acceptance, but just not quite. This one is juvenile orangutan, and it's a nice capture of this young animal. I like the texture and detail that we've got here. The problem for me with this one is the lighting. You've tried to pull the highlights down probably just a bit too far, because it's become quite flat and lacking in light in many respects, and yet on the animal's left bicep we're still left with a patch of yellow that's overexposure. So it's a bit of a problem. You obviously didn't quite have your exposure right to capture this animal and present it in good light. So I'm letting this one go. This is Japanese macaque snow monkey, and I'm thinking this is a quite good image of a macaque monkey bathing in warm water in the snow. I've seen many better images of macaque, and the fact that the hand is out of focus, and we're not really seeing anything very much of the animal, just leaves me feeling that there is more that could have been done here to get a better nature image of this animal, and I've let this one go. This one is simply called Iceberg, and there's not a lot to say about it, really. I mean, it's certainly an iceberg. I do like the composition, and I love the textural detail in the ice. And I think as iceberg photos go, it's probably a reasonably good representation, and I'm happy to accept this one. This one is called Devil's Fingers Fungus, beginning to open, and I think it's a fine presentation of this species. I think that compositionally it could have been improved upon had you put the 3 fingers in the bottom left corner and allowed the 1 finger to come up into the top right corner. You would have got a nice diagonal dynamic going, and I can see with what's here that that would have been possible. I think that would have been a more pleasing composition, but technically speaking, the image is well made, and we can see the species very well, and I'm happy to accept it. Our next image is spotted shag with nest material, and this is a great image. Lovely detail throughout, detail in the darks as well as the lights, and I think you were helped in this case by the soft lighting. Love that it's got nesting material in its beak. And your composition is great too. You've given us good room for the bird to move into, but come in close enough to allow us to see all the details, and it's sharp throughout. So what more could I want? I'm giving this a high acceptance. This one is metallic blue leaf beetle, and this is really quite an immaculate image. We've got a shallow depth of field here, but the eyes and the head and pincers at the front and back into the thorax a little bit. We've got a lovely range of depth of field here where it matters, and we're seeing really sharp, beautiful detail in the leaf as well. And I think it's just stunningly beautiful, and a great image for identifying this species, and I'm awarding this one honours. Next up we have southern crested grebe confrontation, and this is a great image in many respects, but I feel in some ways it's more pictorial than nature, and the main reason that I say that is that the background is totally black. This has been exposed to capture the water and capture the movement, which I think it's done well, but I don't know whether there was flash involved, but we've certainly got a situation where the background has gone totally black, and the black parts of the bodies are merging into the black of the background. And that is problematic from my point of view, despite the fact that it's an amazingly excellent capture of the movement. So it's with a heavy heart that I let this one go. Our next image is Kotuku white heron Ardea modesta. Oh, stumbling a bit there, sorry about that. Anyway, this image is nice in some respects. I love the fine filigree detail of the breeding plumage. Where the image falls down for me is that we don't see the whole bird, and that the head is down to us so we can't see the eyes. And those two things just downgrade this for me as a highly successful image in this competition. And for that reason, I'm letting it go. Our next image is two hummingbirds. I'm not so impressed by the title, I have to say, but the image itself is quite remarkable. I really like the detail that we're seeing in these birds, and you've captured them in dead stop motion in their hover mode. And I think that's great. Lovely detail in the flower as well, and I think this is a highly successful nature image. I'm surprised that you were able to take as good an image of this of these birds and yet not tell us what their species name is. But despite that, just the image itself is excellent, and I'm happy to award this an honours. Our next image is Dusky Dolphin Lagonorhynchus obscurus. And great shot capturing this bird, this dolphin in full leap. You've done well to capture it still like this. From a nature perspective, where an expert might be able to tell you what it is just by the shape, I can't. I just think we could have done with a lot more detail in the beast itself in order to be able to identify what we're seeing here. We are seeing interesting behavior, and you've caught it well, but I'm just not comfortable that it's as strong an image as some of the others that we've seen, and so I'm letting this one go. This image is aggressive display West Coast Weka Gallirelis australis. And we're certainly getting some interesting behavior here. We can see the birds quite clearly. It's a nice, crisp, sharp image. We can see the display of the further away Weka, and I think this is an excellent representation of a natural situation and this species. I'm happy to accept it. This image is Kia Nestor notabilis, and it's a quite good image of a Kia at rest. The fact that its head is down and that we're not really, it's in a hunched up mode, makes it a lot harder to see what the bird actually looks like. And the specular highlights through the forest in the back and on the back of the bird make the quality of the image itself technically lower than much of what we're seeing, and as a result I'm letting this one go too. Next is Kotuku white heron at Okarito, and this is a perfectly good image of the Kotuku. The lighting though is not wonderfully helpful here. We are seeing detail in the bird, which is good, but I think it would have been nice to have seen a little bit more texture and a bit better light, and I'm letting this one go. This one is Sand Ripples on Dune, and there's no doubt that it's a nature topic. I think in this case perhaps the monochrome helps. It would not have lost much colour as a result of being monochrome. I think that it's got nice detail in it, but I'm not seeing such a strong nature narrative in this one as I am in some of the other images that we're seeing, and I'm letting this one go. This one is fern frond. You haven't attempted to tell us what fern it is, and that should have been fairly straightforward to discover, and I think that it's a nice representation of it. Just a little bit lovely detail as well, I have to say, but just a lot of specular highlights in the background make the image quite busy, and I think that could have been controlled. So on balance, this one is just strong enough to make the acceptance grade. Here we have Patroika australis, South Island robin, Kakaruai. It's interesting, I haven't heard that name before, but a lot of names are local to the iwi, and it's not a name I hear up north. And this is definitely recognizable as a South Island robin, so good on that front. Just a couple of issues here. The breast is blowing out, and the greys around the back and the head of the bird are a little bit too dark. We needed a bit more shadow detail in there, and we've chopped off his right foot. The bright area at the bottom is also problematic. I think that could have been toned down. So all in all, I think that we've got a perfectly good nature image with compositional issues, and I'm letting this one go. This one is Australasian gannet, and it's a a good capture of the bird in flight coming into land, so not too difficult to do, particularly if you're in the right place. The lighting is very, very flat, and just the back of the wing is quite grey-white with not much detail, and close in this case to an acceptance, but just doesn't quite make the mark, I'm afraid. Here we have West Coast Weka Gallerellus australis, and this is a finely detailed portrait study of this bird. I'm not sure why we needed so much negative space on the right of the bird. I think we could have cut this down to a more of a square format, and it would have probably felt more comfortable. Either that, or we needed to bring in more of the shoulders of the bird and bring the bird further into the frame. But it's a very good study of this bird's head and neck area, and I'm happy to accept. This one is paperbark tree swampland. I don't know the paperbark tree. I suspect it might be Australian, and part of the what I'm seeing here is what looks like it should be a nice image, but it's just really, really busy with lots of bright and dark throughout it. It may just be that the size I'm able to see it within your system doesn't do it justice, and that it would be wonderful as a large print on a wall or something. But for me, it's just a bit too busy. There's bright spots that look like they're just ducking into overexposed territory, and I'm letting this one go. This is called Tui, Prosthomadera novazelandiae, and it's an interesting shot of the tui. I like its aspect, its attitude on the branch. That's cool. Where I have difficulty is that the colour has been oversaturated, and even in the best of light you never see colours as rich as that in a tui. This is borne out by the oversaturation in the branch as well, and we are also losing detail in the tui's poi, and so those issues count against it. Nice composition, I do like that aspect of it, and this one is not accepted. Next up is Phasalia phasalis, Portuguese man-o'-war. And I think this is a quite solid image. I think it would have been good just to include that last little bit of it at the top, but not highly essential, and the main part of the beast is beautifully crisp and sharp, and we're seeing it in good clear detail. It's not things like the specular highlight, just downgraded a little for me, but not enough to rule it out, and so I'm happy to give this one an acceptance. This is white-faced grey heron, and while it's a fairly static pose, the quality of texture and sharpness of detail and the lovely colour of it make it a strong image for me, and I see nothing to criticise here, and I'm happy to award this a high acceptance. Next up we have Protocypher petalodes, bracket fungi at the boil. I'm not sure where the boil is, but I presume it's a place. This is a good capture. It's a nice sharp capture of this fungi, and by and large its composition is good. It's on a diagonal. I like its presentation. I like its sharpness. I'm just not quite so sure about the degree to which it has been saturated. I just feel that it is slightly oversaturated, or a bit much vibrance, whatever it was you applied, and consequently I'm letting this one go. And our last image of the night is New Zealand dotterel. Charadrius obscurus is not part of the title, but that's its Latin name, which we've heard earlier tonight. And I think that you've done a number of things well here. I like the exposure on the bird. We're seeing nice detail in this low, warm light. I think that the thing is unbalanced to a degree by the centering of the bird here. We've got the grasses on the left, and to a degree the dark area in the background on the right balances it, but I think we could have cropped from the right and just taken the bird off center slightly to the right of the frame, and that would have improved the composition here. I also don't like the blob of light orange, which is part of my reason for suggesting cropping off the right-hand side. So close to an acceptance for this one, but it just doesn't quite make it, I'm afraid. So not accepted for this one. So now comes the fun part of the night, where I get to announce the image that's won best image of the night. And for me, that image is Jumping Spider brackets Hylas, which I think was an exceptionally good image of what's a fairly small spider. And congratulations to the author of that image. I'd also like to comment on the standard of the images, which I thought was generally very high. CPS always produces very good nature images, and this time around was no exception for me. I'd just like to pass comment that this is a nature or natural history competition, and the purpose of a nature competition primarily is to present images that will help identify or show behavior or some close detail of something in the natural world. And in that sense, it's more exacting than a regular set subject competition. And there are very specific rules for nature, and more than for any other competition, you really should review the rules. I know it's easy to say, oh yeah, next month's nature, I'll just throw something nature in, but that's when you get caught out and surprised by the fact that your good nature image didn't do anything. So it is something that you need to do a little bit more review of, and it's well worth having a look at the rules for those of you who didn't before this competition, and just check them out and make sure that you know for next time what sort of thing is required. Having just come back from Dunedin and selecting the National Exhibition for Nature for PSNZ, I can say with reasonable confidence that the bulk of images graded high acceptance and above would have a good chance of gaining acceptance at the National Exhibition. I can only say that with the caveat that if I'm not on the panel, I can't be certain. But they are, the ones high acceptance and above are very strong. Some of the images at acceptance level also would stand a reasonable chance of acceptance, especially for some of them if there was some additional work done to tidy them up. So all in all, I think it's a very high standard that you've put up, and I appreciated it very much. And I'd just like to say thanks again for inviting me to judge your competition for you. And good night to everybody.